It opens with the sharpest contrast. The $40 versus nothing setup lands immediately, because it's math the viewer can check against their own experience. The phrase, "a solution designed for a broken premise," does the villain framing cleanly in one line without being heavy-handed. And the closing line, "when industrial agriculture rewrote the playbook, you're about to get it back," is the most confident identity reframe of the three. It positions the viewer as someone reclaiming something, which is more motivating than simply learning something new. Here's what most people miss when they stand in their garden holding an empty fertilizer bag and wondering why their tomatoes aren't outpacing the neighbors. The problem isn't your technique. It isn't your seeds, your watering frequency, or the particular patch of ground you've chosen to grow in. The problem is the foundational premise you accepted before you ever spent your first dollar at a garden center. Walk into any garden store, and the message is identical regardless of the brand name on the bag. Your soil is deficient. Your plants need inputs. Here is the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium, NPK, printed on every label like a medical prescription from someone with more authority than you. So you follow the instructions. You apply the recommended dose at the recommended time. You water it in. You wait. And your plants grow at exactly the same pace they always have. And you quietly conclude that you must be doing something wrong. Maybe you need a different formula. Maybe you need more of it. You're not doing anything wrong. Don't you've just accepted a system built on the idea that soil is a neutral medium, an inert growing substrate designed to hold your plants upright while you deliver everything they actually need from a bag. That assumption is the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it is wrong in a way that costs you money every single season you repeat it. Here's what most people miss. Soil is not a medium. It is a living system, and a staggeringly complex one. A single tablespoon of healthy, undisturbed soil contains more microorganisms than there are people on Earth. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, an entire underground ecosystem that has been feeding plants for hundreds of millions of years without any outside assistance. These organisms break down organic matter, convert it into forms that roots can absorb, suppress disease pressure, and build the physical architecture that allows water to infiltrate instead of running off the surface. This isn't abstract science. It is observable biology that anyone paying close attention to a healthy garden can see working in real time. You simply have to know what you're looking at. Most of us have never been told what to look for. When you pour synthetic fertilizer onto living soil, you are not feeding that system. You are bypassing it entirely. You're delivering nutrients in a chemical form that plant roots can absorb immediately, but that soil microorganisms cannot use and do not benefit from. Over time, the biology weakens because you have removed its function. The soil structure degrades. Water retention drops. Disease pressure builds. So you apply more fertilizer to compensate for the declining performance, which further diminishes the biology, which creates a larger deficit to fill the following season. The circle doesn't close. It drains, season after season, and the bag gets heavier every year. That's not bad luck. It's a design. And it is a remarkably durable one, because once you accept the premise that your soil cannot function without external inputs, you never stop purchasing them. For thousands of years before the 20th century, farmers across Japan operated on an entirely different foundational premise. They did not treat soil as a substrate to be loaded with purchased inputs. They treated it as a living community to be fed and maintained. Kitchen scraps returned to the earth. Crop residue was composted and applied back to the beds. Rice straw was incorporated instead of burned. Nothing left the farm system as waste because every farmer understood, through generations of direct observation, that everything organic was a future input. The result was soil that grew measurably richer every year, yields that increased across decades rather than requiring ever larger applications to hold steady. Farms that demanded less labor and less cost over time, not more. This wasn't tradition for its own sake. It was applied ecology, refined over centuries by people who could not afford to get it wrong. Japanese small farmers, working plots sometimes no larger than a suburban backyard, had built through patient observation a practical understanding of how soil biology drives plant performance. They didn't use the language of mycorrhizal networks or rhizobial nitrogen fixation. But they knew that when you return the right organic materials to the ground in the right sequence, the ground returns the favor. Automatically, continuously, without purchasing anything. Then the post-war era arrived, and that knowledge became economically inconvenient. The industrial expansion of the 1950s and 1960s needed markets for technologies scaled during wartime. Synthetic nitrogen production, originally developed for munitions, was redirected toward agriculture and priced low enough to undercut traditional methods almost immediately. American agricultural policy and Green Revolution funding carried this model into farming communities worldwide across the following decades. Traditional approaches didn't get tested and disproven. They got outspent. They got replaced, not because they failed, but because they weren't profitable for anyone positioned to promote them. Here's what most people miss about that 85-year gap. The old knowledge didn't disappear because the science refuted it. It disappeared because no one could build a recurring revenue model around teaching a farmer to use what was already sitting in his kitchen. You cannot sell a monthly subscription to a $2 technique that regenerates itself. You can sell a monthly bag of pellets and market it as modern, scientific, and essential. The industry didn't fabricate plant science. It simply made sure the version of plant science that reached you was the version that required their product to function. Your soil is not broken by nature. It has been biologically impoverished by a management approach that profits from that impoverishment. The bacteria are still there. The fungi are still there. The capacity of the ground beneath your feet to feed your plants without your buying anything has not gone anywhere. It has simply been suppressed long enough that you stopped expecting it to work. The problem isn't your garden. It's what you've been told a garden needs. The technique is called fermented plant juice. And if that phrase makes you think of something complicated happening in a laboratory, let me correct that immediately. It is rice water, brown sugar, and whatever green plant material is growing fastest in your yard right now. That is the entire ingredient list. The total cost for your first batch is under $2 if you already have a kitchen, and you almost certainly do. Here is what most people miss when they first hear about fermented plant juice. They assume the fermentation is the point. It is not. The fermentation is the delivery mechanism. The actual point is what happens in your soil in the 3 to 6 weeks after you apply it. When the microbial population in the ground around your plant roots begins to multiply at a rate that changes the chemistry of the soil in ways that are visible to the naked eye if you know what to look for. Let me explain the mechanism, because this is the part that separates the people who use this method once and give up from the people who use it for years. When you apply fermented plant juice to your soil, you are introducing two things simultaneously. First, you are delivering plant hormones and trace compounds extracted from actively growing tissue, the same chemical signals that the plant itself produces when it is in peak growth mode. Second, and more importantly, you are introducing a dense population of lactic acid bacteria. These organisms do not feed your plants directly. What they do is dramatically accelerate the breakdown of organic matter already present in your soil, converting it into forms that plant roots can absorb immediately. They also outcompete the pathogenic bacteria and fungi that cause root rot, damping off, and the half-dozen other soil-borne diseases that quietly kill plants before you even know they are sick. One application, two simultaneous benefits. The soil feeds faster and defends better at the same time. This is not mysticism. This is not a folk remedy that works because someone believes in it. It is basic microbiology operating in your favor instead of against you. The lactic acid fermentation process is the same one that produces yogurt, kimchi, and sourdough. You are not doing anything exotic. You are creating the conditions for biology that has existed for billions of years to express itself in the 12 inches of soil beneath your tomatoes. The $2 breakdown is exact. You need 1 cup of fresh plant material, comfrey leaves if you have them, compost tea weeds if you do not, young grass clippings in a pinch, anything growing vigorously and green. You need 1 cup of rice water, which is the cloudy water left over after you rinse uncooked white rice. You need 1 tablespoon of brown sugar or raw molasses, which feeds the bacterial population during fermentation. You pack everything into a glass jar, seal it loosely so pressure can escape, and leave it somewhere between 65 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit for 5 to 7 days. When it smells pleasantly sour, tangy, not rotten, the same way a jar of sauerkraut smells when it is ready, it is done. You dilute 1 part, concentrate to 20 parts water, and apply it directly to the soil around your plant roots, not to the leaves, once per week during the active growing season. That is the entire protocol. First visible results appear within 2 to 3 weeks, not in the plants themselves initially, but in the soil. You will notice the texture changing. Surface crusting softens. The ground becomes easier to push a finger into, and the color darkens toward a richer brown as microbial activity increases organic matter breakdown. By week 4, you will see it in the plants. Stem diameter increases. Leaf color deepens. New growth nodes appear faster. By week 8 in a healthy application, the difference between treated and untreated beds is not subtle. It is the kind of difference that makes people ask what you are doing differently. My own beds showed the stem diameter change first. 1 Roma tomato plant treated from transplant. 1 planted the same day in the same mix without treatment. By week 3, the untreated plant was visibly thinner at the base. By week 6, the treated plant was setting fruit, while the control was still in heavy vegetative growth. That is not a controlled experiment with 16 variables isolated. It is one observation from one season. But it is the kind of observation that you can replicate yourself in your own backyard with $2 and 7 days of patience. Here is where this gets elegant. And this is something most people overlook entirely until their 2nd or 3rd season using it. You are not just feeding your soil biology. You are building a loop that requires no external inputs after the first batch. The plants growing most vigorously in your treated beds become the source material for your next batch of fermented plant juice. You harvest the healthiest, fastest growing green tissue, ferment it, apply it back, and the soil produces more vigorous growth, which produces better source material for the following batch. The system feeds itself forward. Nothing leaves the loop as waste. You are not fertilizing your plants. You are feeding the ecosystem that feeds your plants. And that ecosystem, once activated, does the feeding continuously without your doing anything beyond maintaining the fermentation cycle. Now let's talk about exactly how to set this up from scratch if you have never fermented anything before. Because the preparation step is where most people introduce the one variable that actually matters. The most common setup mistake is using chlorinated tap water. Chlorine is added to municipal water specifically to kill microorganisms, which is useful for drinking water and fatal for a culture you are trying to build. Use collected rainwater if you have it. If you do not, fill a container with tap water and leave it uncovered for 24 hours before using it. Chlorine off gases at room temperature. After 24 hours, your tap water will not harm the bacterial culture you are building. This costs nothing and takes no additional time. The milestones matter because they keep you from quitting during the weeks when nothing visible has happened yet, and you start wondering whether you made the jar wrong. At week 2, you are not looking at the plants. You are looking at the soil surface directly around the stem base. Press 2 fingers gently into the ground where you applied the diluted solution. If the crust that formed after your last watering has softened, and if the soil releases from your fingers without clumping in dry flakes, the biology is activating. That is the first confirmation. It is not dramatic. It will not make you want to film anything. But it is real, and it is earlier than most people expect. Week 4. Now you look at the plants. Specifically, look at the thickness of the main stem 2 inches above the soil line, and look at the color of the newest leaves at the top of the plant. Stems should be visibly thicker than a comparable untreated plant started the same week. New leaves should be a more saturated green, not yellowed at the edges, which indicates nitrogen deficiency, and not pale or washed out, which indicates the biology has not yet fully engaged. Dark, thick, and growing fast. That is what week 4 looks like when the system is working. Week 8, fruit set on tomatoes, lateral branching on peppers and squash. root vegetables pushing visible shoulder above the soil line earlier than the seed packet projected. And the soil itself will have changed texture at depth. Push a hand trowel in 6 inches, and the resistance will be noticeably less than it was at planting. Loose, dark, faintly earthy-smelling soil at 6 inches means the microbial community has extended its range downward. Your roots are following it. The plants are not struggling upward toward light anymore. They are pulling resources from a deeper, richer zone. Small containers work. This is not a method that requires acreage or raised beds or any particular soil depth. A 5-gallon bucket with drainage holes, standard potting mix, and weekly fermented plant juice applications will outperform the same bucket managed with synthetic fertilizer by week 6 of a growing season. I have run this on a 12-square-foot balcony in containers that cost less than the first bag of fertilizer I stopped buying. The biology does not care about square footage. It cares about the conditions you create, and those conditions fit inside a bucket just as well as they fit inside a half-acre kitchen garden. Clay soil benefits more than any other type because the lactic acid bacteria actively improve clay structure over time, creating the aggregate crumbling texture that clay lacks, and that allows both water infiltration and root penetration to happen simultaneously. Sandy soil benefits almost as immediately because the increased organic matter from accelerated decomposition fills the gaps that cause sandy soil to drain too fast and hold too little. Whatever your starting condition, the biology moves toward health. You are not fighting your soil type. You are feeding the organisms that fix it from the inside. Now here's where most people sabotage themselves, and I see the same 3 mistakes repeated so consistently that they are worth naming directly. The first mistake is applying it daily, because more seems better. It is not. You are feeding a living population, and overfeeding causes the wrong organisms to dominate. Once per week at the 20-to-1 dilution is the correct cadence during active growing season. Twice per week during transplant stress or visible disease pressure. Never daily. Never undiluted directly on roots. The concentration that helps at the correct dose causes root burn at 3 times that dose, and root burn looks exactly like underwatering, which causes people to apply more solution, which causes more damage. Once per week. That is the rule. The second mistake is skipping the full fermentation window, because the jar smells sour after 3 days and seems ready. 3 days is too early. The lactic acid bacteria population has not yet outcompeted the other organisms in the culture. Apply a 3-day ferment, and you are potentially introducing pathogenic microbes alongside beneficial ones. Wait the full 5 to 7 days until the smell stabilizes into that clean, tangy sourness that does not change when you open the jar 2 days in a row. Stability is the signal, not the first appearance of sourness. The third mistake is expecting soil transformation in 1 season. Here's what most people miss about the timeline. The first season, you are building microbial population density from near zero in depleted soil. You will see plant response. You will not see full soil transformation. The second season, you are maintaining and expanding a population that survived the winter in your soil organic matter. Results in year 2 are visibly better than year 1 without changing anything about your protocol. By year 3, the soil is doing work you cannot fully explain by the inputs alone, due because the community has grown complex enough to create feedback loops you didn't design. That is the payoff. It is not this weekend. It is this growing season and the 2 after it. The math closes the argument. Commercial fertilizer for a mid-size home garden runs between $40 and $80 per season, depending on what you are growing and how often you apply. Fermented plant juice costs $2 in brown sugar and molasses for a full season of batches, because the plant material comes from your yard for free, and the rice water comes from your kitchen as a byproduct of cooking. The ROI on the first season is $38 to $78. By season 3, when your soil biology is self-sustaining and your inputs have dropped to near zero, you are banking the full fertilizer budget every year permanently. You spent $40 this season. Your neighbor spent nothing and got the same yield. Next season, you spend $2 and get yields they cannot explain without asking you what changed. Start this week. Rinse your rice. Save the water. Find the greenest, fastest growing thing in your yard. Pack the jar. Wait 7 days. The soil that is supposed to be feeding your plants has been waiting for this for years. Your plants are ready to show you what they can actually do.